The night my oldest son lost his battle with brain cancer, I thought my life was over. My parents had turned their backs on me. My ex-wife mocked me when I begged for help, and I was left to carry everything on my shoulders until I broke. I came dangerously close to ending it all, but I didn't. I made a choice to keep living for my younger sons. I thought the hardest part of my story was behind me. Until 2 weeks later, I heard a knock at the door that would change everything I thought I knew about family, about love, and about survival. My name is Michael Turner. I am a father of 3 boys, or at least I was, until cancer ripped one of them from me. My oldest, Jacob, was only 15. He loved the stars the way they seemed endless and full of promise. My 6-year-old twins, Ethan and Ryan, are bundles of energy and innocence too young to understand the weight of the grief that consumed me. My parents, Charles and Margaret, are still alive, but in many ways I lost them long before I lost my son. They see me as a failure, a man who never lived up to their expectations. And then there is Jennifer, my ex-wife, who walked away from our marriage and from her children, chasing a life she thought was better without us. This is not a story about being strong. This is a story about being broken, about begging for help, and being denied, about losing the most precious thing in the world, and somehow finding a reason to keep going. It is about the day I nearly gave up, and the day a stranger knocked on my door and turned my pain into something I never expected. Hope. My name is Michael Turner, and if you had met me a few years ago, you would have seen a man who believed he had it all figured out. I was 40, a high school history teacher in Springfield, where everyone knew everyone else. I had 3 boys who made me proud every single day, even though raising them on my own wasn't easy. I lived paycheck to paycheck, stretching every dollar, but I never let my kids feel like they were missing out. My life was simple, maybe even ordinary, but for me, it was everything. I lived with my children in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of an aging brick building. The place was cramped and drafty in the winter, and the plumbing rattled like it was begging for mercy. But to my boys, it was home. We filled it with laughter. School projects spread across the kitchen table and stacks of library books that never seemed to stop multiplying. My oldest, Jacob, was 15. He was tall for his age, with a mop of brown hair that always stuck out in every direction, no matter how hard he tried to comb it down. He had a gentle soul, the kind of boy who noticed when you were tired and quietly offered to help without being asked. His love was astronomy. We would sit together on the tiny balcony outside our living room, bundled in jackets, staring at the night sky through a second-hand telescope I had bought years ago. He would point out constellations, his eyes full of wonder. "Dad," he once said, "do you think there are other kids out there looking up at us right now?" I told him I believed there were, and he smiled like the universe made sense to him in that moment. Then there were the twins, Ethan and Ryan. They were 6 bundles of unstoppable energy. Ethan was bold and mischievous, always testing limits, while Ryan was more cautious but endlessly curious. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, inventing games only they understood, and running circles around me until I collapsed on the couch, laughing and pretending to be defeated. Raising twins was chaos, but it was also joy in its purest form. Being a single father wasn't the plan I had for my life, but it was the life I was given after my marriage to Jennifer collapsed. We met in college, fell hard, and married young. For a while it worked. But as the years went on, Jennifer began to resent the life we built. She wanted more money, more status, more excitement. I was just a school teacher, a steady man with steady dreams. She wanted the opposite. When she left, she made it clear she wasn't leaving only me, but the life we had built together, including the responsibilities of raising our children. Jennifer remarried not long after the divorce. She lived across town in a large house with her new husband, someone who could give her the material comforts I never could. She called the boys occasionally on birthdays and holidays, but her presence was distant, like a guest star who occasionally appeared in our lives and then vanished. The boys learned not to expect much from her. I tried not to let my bitterness show, but deep down, it stung every time I saw the hurt in Jacob's eyes when she missed a call or forgot a promise. My parents. Charles and Margaret lived 20 minutes away, but they might as well have lived on another planet. My father was a stern man who believed success was measured in money and titles. To him, teaching was a failure, not a calling. He saw me as weak, a disappointment, someone who had never lived up to his expectations. My mother followed his lead, rarely challenging him, her silence cutting as deeply as his harsh words. When Jennifer left, I thought my parents would step in to help, but they only grew more distant. "You chose this life, Michael Turner," my father said once when I asked for help with the twins. I learned quickly not to rely on them. Still, even with all of that, my life felt full because of my children. Every morning I woke up to their laughter, their arguments over cereal, their backpacks scattered by the door. My days were long filled with teaching teenagers about history, and then rushing home to make dinner, check homework, and tuck the twins into bed while Jacob and I shared quiet moments on the balcony. I was tired, always tired, but it was the kind of exhaustion that came with purpose. When Jacob first began complaining about headaches, I thought it was stress from school or too much time staring at his phone. When his vision blurred and he grew dizzy, I told myself it was just exhaustion. But then the headaches became unbearable, and one night he collapsed in the kitchen while reaching for a glass of water. I rushed him to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear I couldn't put into words. That night was the beginning of everything unraveling. The doctors ran tests, their faces carefully neutral as they spoke in calm, measured tones. Then they told me what no parent ever wants to hear: a tumor, brain cancer. Words that shattered the fragile world I had built for my family. I remember gripping the edge of the hospital bed, my mind refusing to accept what they were saying. My eyes fixed on Jacob's pale face. He was only 15. He still had dreams of standing at the edge of Yellowstone National Park, of building rockets, of growing up. My boy, who loved the stars, was now fighting a disease that threatened to extinguish his light. That was the moment everything changed. My classroom lessons, my struggles with Jennifer, my father's disapproval, all of it became meaningless compared to the fight ahead. I knew then that my life would never be the same. The weeks after Jacob's diagnosis felt like stepping into a nightmare that refused to end. The hospital became a second home. Its sterile smell and constant beeping monitors etched into my senses. The doctors explained treatment plans with charts and pamphlets, their words a blur as I tried to hold myself together for my son. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. None of it was guaranteed. All I could see was Jacob lying in that bed, his once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion. And all I could think was, how do I keep my family together while the world falls apart? The problem was not only the cancer, it was life itself. I was a single father with a full-time job and 3 children, one of them critically ill. The twins, Ethan and Ryan, were only 6. They needed constant supervision meals, baths, bedtime stories, and comfort. I could not leave them alone. But I also could not abandon Jacob at the hospital. Every day I woke up torn in two, desperate to be everywhere at once, knowing I was failing in both places. At first I tried to manage on my own. I brought coloring books and toys to the hospital so the twins could stay with me while I sat by Jacob's side. They would play on the floor of the waiting room, their laughter cutting painfully against the sound of doctors' footsteps and crying families. The nurses were kind, offering snacks or keeping an eye on the boys when I had to speak with doctors, but I knew it was unsustainable. The twins deserved stability, not endless hours in hospital corridors. So I did the only thing I thought I could do. I called my parents. I dialed their number late one night, my hands shaking, my voice raw from days without sleep. "Mom." "Dad," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I need help." Jacob's treatments are starting tomorrow and I can't bring Ethan and Ryan with me every time. Can you please watch them? Just for a few hours a couple of days a week." There was a pause on the other end. My mother's voice came first, quiet and uncertain. "Michael, we are too old for that kind of responsibility. You know how your father feels." Then my father took the phone. His voice was sharp cold. "Michael, you made your choices. You decided to be a teacher. You decided to marry that woman. And you decided to keep those kids. It's not our job to fix your life." "Dad," I pleaded, the words tumbling out faster than I could control. "This isn't about me. It's about Jacob. He is dying and I need to be with him. I can't do this alone." "You've been coddled long enough," he snapped. "You figure it out." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, the silence pressing down like a weight. I felt abandoned in a way I had never felt before. My parents were only 20 minutes away, yet they had just turned their backs on their grandchildren. I sat in the dark of my apartment that night, the twins asleep in their room, Jacob resting in the hospital. I thought of every moment my parents had criticized me, every time they had withheld their approval. And now, when I needed them most, they had confirmed what I had always feared. To them, I was nothing but a disappointment. Still, I couldn't give up. I had one more option. Jennifer. Calling her was a last resort, but I had no choice. I dialed her number, my stomach in knots. When she answered, her voice was clipped and impatient. "What do you want, Michael?" I took a deep breath. "Jennifer, it's Jacob. He's getting worse. I need to be at the hospital with him, and I can't keep bringing the twins there. They need someone to watch them. Please, I'm begging you." There was a pause, then a laugh that cut through me like a knife. "Are you serious? You're asking me to play babysitter because you can't manage your own life? You're just a broke teacher, Michael. You figure it out." "Jennifer," I said, my voice breaking. "He's your son too. He doesn't have much time. Please do this for him, if not for me." Her tone hardened. "I moved on from that life. Michael, you need to do the same." Then she hung up. I sat there. The phone pressed against my ear, unable to move. My chest felt like it was caving and my heart pounding with anger and grief. I had begged her for help, not for myself, but for our children, and she had laughed in my face. From that moment on, I understood that I was truly alone. I had no parents willing to step in, no ex-wife who cared, no safety net. It was me against the storm. So I kept dragging the twins to the hospital, their backpacks stuffed with snacks and toys, while I tried to split myself between being a father to them and a caretaker to Jacob. Some nights I held Jacob's hand as he drifted into restless sleep, while Ethan and Ryan curled up in chairs beside me, their little bodies too tired to stay awake any longer. I would sit there, my heart torn in 3 directions, praying for strength I did not have. Every morning I woke up more exhausted, more desperate, and every night as I watched my son's body weaken, I wondered how much longer I could keep this up before I collapsed completely. The night Jacob died, the world seemed to stop. Outside the hospital, rain pounded against the windows and thunder rolled across the sky like the earth itself was mourning. Inside, I sat at his bedside, gripping his hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest grow weaker with each breath. His once bright eyes, the ones that had looked at the stars with wonder, fluttered open one last time. He gave me the faintest smile, barely a whisper of his old self, and said, "Dad, don't be sad. Promise me you'll take care of Ethan and Ryan." I swallowed the lump in my throat, fighting to give him the strength he deserved. "I promise, son," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, closed his eyes, and within minutes, he was gone. The room filled with silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the crushing emptiness of absence. My boy, my firstborn, was gone, and no words could change that. I lowered my head onto his chest, sobbing into the stillness, my tears soaking his hospital gown. After the funeral, I moved through the days like a ghost. The twins were too young to grasp the full weight of what had happened. They asked where their brother was, and when I told them he had gone to heaven, they cried for a few minutes, and then clung to me, seeking comfort in ways they couldn't express. I gave them what I could, but inside I was hollow. At night, when the boys were asleep, I sat in the living room staring at the ceiling. The silence of the apartment pressed in around me. Jacob's telescope still stood by the balcony door, its lens pointed toward the sky he would never see again. I thought about joining him, ending the unbearable pain that gnawed at me every second of the day. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of pills in front of me. My hands shook as I unscrewed the cap, my mind racing with memories of Jacob's laugh, his questions about the stars, the way he used to hug me without warning. I told myself I had failed him. I had failed to save him, failed to protect him. The world was cruel, and I was too weak to fight anymore. As I sat there, Ethan wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Daddy, are you okay?" he asked softly. His voice was small, innocent, but it pierced straight through me. I quickly slid the bottle out of sight and forced a smile I did not feel. "I'm okay, buddy. Why are you awake?" "I had a bad dream," he whispered, climbing onto my lap. "I dreamed you left me and Ryan." Those words broke me. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine. A moment later, Ryan padded into the room, dragging his blanket, and climbed onto my other knee. The three of us sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, their tiny arms wrapped around me, their trust absolute. Daddy Ryan said, his voice muffled against my chest, "Please don't go away too." The dam inside me burst. I held them tighter, tears streaming down my face, and in that moment I made a decision. I could not leave them. I could not let them grow up without a father. Jacob was gone, but Ethan and Ryan were still here, still alive, still needing me. No matter how broken I felt, I had to fight for them. That night became the turning point. I took the pills and flushed them down the toilet, watching as they disappeared, a physical symbol of the choice I was making. I was choosing to live not for myself, but for my remaining sons. The days that followed were not easy. Grief still weighed on me, heavy and unrelenting, but I began to shift my focus. I started small. I cooked the boys breakfast, even if it was just scrambled eggs and toast. I walked them to the park, letting them run and play, their laughter cutting through my sorrow like sunlight through storm clouds. At night, I tucked them into bed and told them stories about Jacob, about the brother who loved the stars, making sure his memory would never fade. I also returned to teaching, though every step into the classroom felt like walking through mud. My students noticed the change in me, the exhaustion in my face, but I tried to stay steady. Teaching gave me structure, something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. I began to rebuild myself, piece by piece, not because I was strong, but because I had no other choice. Ethan and Ryan needed me. They needed stability, love, and guidance. They needed a father who would stand in the storm and refuse to be blown away. And as I clung to that purpose, a strange thing happened. A small ember of hope began to flicker inside me. It was fragile, barely noticeable, but it was there. I could not bring Jacob back, but I could honor him by living by keeping the promise I made at his bedside. Late one evening, when I was just beginning to find my footing, there came a knock at the door. It was late in the evening. The twins were playing with blocks in the living room, their laughter filling the apartment. I stood hesitant, wondering who could possibly be visiting us. When I opened the door, I had no idea that the man standing on the other side would change everything again. The knock came softly at first, then firmer, as though the person on the other side wasn't sure if they should be there. I hesitated. Visitors were rare. Jennifer hadn't spoken to me since the day she laughed in my face. My parents had vanished from my life, their absence a wound that no longer surprised me. I wondered if it was a neighbor, maybe someone complaining about the noise of the twins' laughter carrying through the thin walls. When I opened the door, the man standing there was a stranger. He looked to be in his late 40s, tall, with streaks of gray in his hair and kind eyes that seemed unsettled as they met mine. He held a leather folder in one hand, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. "Are you Michael Turner?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with nerves. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" He shifted his weight, took a breath, and said, "My name is David Brooks. I believe I'm your brother." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for some explanation that made sense. My father had never once mentioned another child. My mother had never hinted at such a thing. The idea seemed impossible, absurd, and yet the man before me radiated sincerity. "My brother," I repeated, my voice sharp. David nodded. "I know this is a shock. I didn't know about you either. Not until a few years ago. Our father, Charles, he had an affair when he was younger. My mother raised me on her own. I grew up knowing nothing about him, nothing about you. But when I started digging into my family history, I found his name and eventually yours. I felt anger rising in my chest, not at David, but at the man who had raised me. Charles, who spent my entire life judging me, belittling me, withholding his love. Charles, who let me beg for help and slammed the door in my face while my son lay dying. He had kept a secret this big, a son he never acknowledged while treating me like I was nothing. I tightened my grip on the door frame, my voice shaking. "Why are you here now?" David lowered his eyes briefly, then looked back at me. "I heard about Jacob. I know I'm too late to meet him, and I'm sorry. I know you don't owe me anything, but I didn't want to stay silent. I wanted to meet you, and I want you to know that you don't have to carry this alone anymore. I have the means to help. And more than that, I want to be here for you and the boys." Behind me, Ethan and Ryan peeked out from the living room, their small faces full of curiosity. "Daddy, who is it?" Ryan asked. I turned back to David, conflicted. My heart screamed to slam the door to reject the intrusion of yet another complicated truth, but something in his eyes stopped me. They were not the eyes of a man looking for redemption from his own mistakes. They were the eyes of someone offering a lifeline. "Come inside," I said finally, my voice low. David stepped into the apartment, his gaze moving to the boys. He knelt down to their level, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Hi there, I'm David." Ethan tilted his head, suspicious but intrigued. "Are you Daddy's friend?" David hesitated, then glanced at me. I gave a small nod. "Something like that," he said softly. The boys, satisfied with the answer, darted back to their blocks, their laughter filling the room again. David watched them for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then turned back to me. "I know I can't replace what you've lost," he said. "But I've spent my whole life wondering where I came from. If I had family somewhere out there. And now standing here, I think maybe we were both missing something. You needed someone, and I needed a place to belong. I can't undo the past, but I can be here now." I wanted to be angry, to push him away, to reject the reminder of everything my father had kept from me. But instead I felt something else. Relief. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. This man, this unexpected brother, had chosen to come to me when everyone else had turned away. The weight of grief, betrayal, and loneliness pressed against my chest. But for once it didn't crush me. Instead, it loosened just enough for me to breathe. I gestured toward the couch. "Sit down. We have a lot to talk about." As we sat together in that small apartment, the twins building towers at our feet, I realized that the knock at the door was not just an interruption. It was the beginning of something new. David's presence didn't erase the pain of losing Jacob or the betrayal of my parents and ex-wife. but it did bring a possibility I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That night, after David left with a promise to return, I stood on the balcony and looked through Jacob's telescope. The stars stretched endlessly above me, the same ones he had loved so much. For the first time since his death, I whispered into the night, "We're going to be okay, son." David returned the next day. True to his word, he did not come empty-handed. He arrived with groceries, children's books, and even a box of Legos for the twins. He greeted them by name, already remembering who was Ethan and who was Ryan. They rushed to him with the unfiltered openness only children can give, dragging him to the floor to build castles and towers. I watched from the kitchen, unsure of what to make of it. Part of me still bristled at the idea of letting someone connected to my father into my home. My anger at Charles had not faded, and I doubted it ever would. But as I saw David laughing with my sons, his eyes full of genuine joy, I realized that whatever sins my father had committed, David was not responsible for them. He was here not because he had to be, but because he wanted to be. Over the following weeks, David became a fixture in our lives. He came by after work, helped with dinner, and offered to watch the twins when I needed a break. He even went with me to the cemetery, standing silently beside me as I laid fresh flowers on Jacob's grave. He did not offer empty platitudes or try to tell me the pain would pass. He simply stood there sharing the weight without trying to lighten it, and somehow that meant more than any words could have. The twins adored him. They began to call him Uncle David, a title he accepted with tears in his eyes. He read to them at night, carried them on his shoulders at the park, and sat with them through their endless questions about life and death. When Ethan asked if Jacob could see them from heaven, David knelt down and said, "I believe he can, and I believe he is proud of all of you." I had spent so long feeling abandoned that the sudden presence of support felt almost foreign. I struggled with it at first, still convinced that if I leaned on someone else, they would eventually walk away like everyone before. But David didn't walk away. He showed up again and again, until slowly I began to believe that maybe he wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't just David's presence that changed me. It was what his presence reminded me of. For years I had measured my worth against the cold approval of my father and the scorn of my ex-wife. I had allowed their rejection to define me. But as I watched my sons giggle with their uncle as I saw David invest in a family he had only just discovered, I realized I had been measuring myself against the wrong standards. Family is not about who shares your blood. It is about who chooses to stand beside you when everything falls apart. My parents had refused to be there. Jennifer had mocked me in my darkest hour, but David, a man who had no obligation to me, had chosen to step into the chaos and stay. The change did not happen overnight. Grief still hit me in waves, unexpected and crushing. There were nights when I still sat by the telescope and cried until I had no tears left. There were mornings when I woke up wishing it had all been a dream. But little by little I found strength in keeping the promise I had made to Jacob. I poured myself into raising Ethan and Ryan, teaching them kindness, resilience, and love, and with David's help, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we would be okay. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the four of us sat on the balcony. The twins took turns peering through the telescope, squealing with excitement when they found the moon. David leaned back in his chair, smiling as he listened to them argue about whose turn it was. I sat quietly watching them, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I thought about Jacob and how much he would have loved this moment. I thought about the night he asked me to take care of his brothers, and I felt his presence in the laughter that filled the air. I whispered silently, "I kept my promise, son." Turning to David, I said, "Thank you for being here. You don't know what this means to us." He looked at me, his eyes steady. "No, Michael, you don't know what this means to me. I spent my whole life searching for family, and I never thought I would find it like this. You saved me too." In that moment, I understood something I had not been able to see before. Loss had broken me. Betrayal had scarred me. But love had found its way back into my life in a form I never expected. I had learned that sometimes the people who hurt us are not the ones who define us. It is the people who choose us, who show up, who love us without condition, who become our true family. That night, after the twins fell asleep and the apartment was quiet, I stood on the balcony once more. The stars stretched endlessly above, and for the first time since Jacob's death, I felt not just grief, but gratitude. I had lost my son, but I had not lost my purpose. I had found a brother I never knew I had, and together we were building a future that honored Jacob's memory. This is what I carry with me now. No matter how dark life becomes, there can always be light waiting where you least expect it. Sometimes it comes in the form of a knock on the door, a stranger who turns out to be family, and a reminder that even in the deepest sorrow, love can still find you. That is my story. I lost my son. I was abandoned by the people I thought I could count on, and I nearly gave up. But I chose to live for my boys. And when I opened that door, I discovered that sometimes family is not who you expect, but who chooses to stand beside you when you need them most. If this story touched you, please give it a like so more people can see it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest moments, hope can still find its way in. Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts. I read every single one, and your words matter more than you know. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are never truly alone. The day everything collapsed started with a single sentence that shattered me. My wife looked at me with eyes I barely recognized anymore and said, "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." Those words hit harder than losing my job earlier that morning. I had walked into the factory I'd worked at for nearly 12 years, only to be told my position was gone. No warning, no thank you, just a box with my things and a handshake that felt more like a dismissal of my existence. By the time Laura threw her words at me, I already felt hollow. But when she said she was taking Jacob and Emily, it was like she ripped the last pieces of my life away. I stood there stunned, clutching the worn lunch bag my mother Margaret had sewn for me years ago, the same one I carried every day to work. My children's laughter, their drawings on the fridge, the bedtime stories. I saw all of it slipping through my fingers in that moment. I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. I stepped out without knowing where to go. The cool September air hitting my face, as if the world itself was reminding me I had nothing left. My mind was spiraling, telling me she was right, that I had failed, not just her, but Jacob and Emily too. I wandered for what felt like hours, until I found myself standing in front of a place I hadn't been before. A small diner glowing with warm yellow lights against the night. I pushed open the door and slid into a booth at the corner, staring at the steaming cup of coffee a waitress had placed in front of me. My reflection in the dark liquid looked like a man I didn't recognize. Tired, broken, lost. I was so wrapped up in my own despair that I didn't notice the old man sitting down beside me until he spoke. "You looked just like my son," he said in a steady, deliberate voice. I turned my head confused. His weathered face was full of lines that spoke of decades of stories, but his eyes carried a pain I couldn't ignore. He added, "But he's been missing for 40 years. My heart pounded as I tried to process his words. Before I could respond, he leaned forward slightly, studying me as if I might vanish. What he said next. 5 simple words would change the course of my life in a way I could never have imagined. I grew up in a family that believed in working with your hands, keeping your word and carrying yourself with quiet pride. My father, Frank, was a mechanic who could fix anything with an engine. He was never one to talk much, but when he did, his words stuck with me. A man is measured by how he stands when everything else falls apart. He told me once when I was a teenager sulking about a broken-down truck. At the time, I brushed it off. Years later, those words would echo in ways I never expected. My mother, Margaret, balanced him perfectly. She was soft-spoken, but her kindness carried weight. She believed in second chances and making people feel seen. She was the one who sat with me on nights I struggled with schoolwork, reminding me that patience and persistence mattered more than quick wins. I carried her lessons into adulthood, though somewhere along the way I began to feel like they no longer applied to me. I was never the star athlete, never the popular kid, never the man people pointed to with admiration. But I worked hard. I took pride in showing up early to the factory, even when my back ached or my hands were raw from handling steel. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and for a long time I believed it proved my worth. Then came Laura. She was confident, quick-witted, and sharper than anyone I had ever met. Where I hesitated, she charged forward. She told me once, early in our marriage, "You make me feel safe, Michael, like the ground under my feet won't give way." I held on to that sentence for years. We built a family together, and when Jacob was born, followed by Emily 3 years later, I thought we had found our rhythm. But as time passed, Laura's words shifted. Instead of telling me I made her feel safe, she told me I made her feel stuck. Instead of seeing my consistency as strength, she saw it as complacency. "You never want more, Michael," she would say after another argument about money. "You're fine staying at the bottom while everyone else climbs." She was right in some ways. I had dreams once, but I buried them under responsibility and routine. Every morning I punched the clock. Every evening I tried to be the husband and father I thought I was supposed to be. I believed it was enough, but enough for me was not enough for her. The kids, though, they never looked at me with disappointment. Jacob, at 11 years old, had his mother's sharpness, but my quiet nature. He asked questions about everything from how engines worked to why people argued when they loved each other. Emily, at 8, lived with joy that could light up any room. She loved drawing animals and leaving them taped on the fridge for me to see when I got home. The two of them made the weight of my life feel lighter. They were the reason I kept pushing even when the ground beneath me began to crack. My brother Daniel was another voice in my life I couldn't ignore. He was younger but more ambitious, always chasing bigger opportunities. He told me once over a beer, "You need to fight for yourself, Michael. You keep letting life run you over." At the time, I laughed it off, but his words stayed lodged in the back of my mind. When the factory let me go, it was like a part of my identity was ripped out. I had walked through those steel doors nearly every day for 12 years. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the machines. Losing that job wasn't just about losing a paycheck. It felt like losing proof that I mattered, that my hard work meant something. I drove home that afternoon with the box of my belongings on the passenger seat, staring at my reflection in the window as the world blurred past. My chest was tight, my thoughts loud. How would I tell Laura? What would she say when I stepped into the house she was waiting? Her eyes scanned me, then the box in my arms. "They let you go, didn't they?" she asked. There was no concern in her voice, just a cold certainty. I nodded. Cutbacks. Nothing I could do. She crossed her arms. "Nothing you could do. That's always your answer." I tried to explain to tell her that I would find another job, that this didn't mean the end. But before I could finish, she said the words that still ring in my ears. "You're worthless. I'm taking Jacob and Emily." In that moment, it felt like the walls of our home closed in. I wanted to argue, to shout, to prove her wrong. I looked at the photos on the wall, at the crayon drawings taped to the fridge, and felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. Laura gathered a bag and told the kids they were staying at her sister's for the night. Jacob looked at me with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, are you coming?" he asked. My throat burned as I forced a smile and shook my head. "Not tonight, buddy. I'll see you soon. I stood in the doorway as they left, the sound of the car pulling out of the driveway cutting through the stillness of the house. Alone, I walked into the kitchen and placed the factory box on the table. Inside were the small tokens of my life's work: a dented thermos, a pair of worn gloves, a photo Jacob had drawn of me holding his hand. My chest felt like it was caving in. That was the state I was in when I stepped outside, leaving the house and everything inside it. My feet carried me without thought, each step heavier than the last, until the neon glow of Sam's Diner sign flickered in the distance. Sam's Diner was small, tucked between a pawn shop and a gas station, the kind of place most people drove past without a second glance. Its windows glowed with a faint yellow light, and the sign above the door buzzed in the night. I stepped inside, and the warmth wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't deserve. The air smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, a reminder of countless mornings when I had rushed through meals before heading to the factory. I slid into a booth near the back, away from the handful of customers scattered across the room. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, poured me a cup of coffee without asking. I nodded, muttered a thank you, and stared into the dark liquid. The reflection staring back at me looked older than 40, beaten down by the weight of failure. My hands shook slightly as I held the cup, though I never brought it to my lips. The voices in my head were louder than the hum of the ceiling fan. Laura's words repeated over and over. "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." I tried to convince myself she didn't mean it, that she was angry and lashing out. But deep down, I knew she had been building toward this for years. Every argument about money, every sigh when I walked in late from work, every moment I thought she wanted comfort but gave me silence. Instead, it all led to this. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to block out the noise in my mind. That was when I heard the scrape of a chair across the floor. Someone slid into the booth across from me. I lowered my hands and saw an old man staring at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. His face was weathered, his skin tanned and marked by time. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his clothes looked clean but worn, like he had lived a hard life. "You look just like my son," he said. His voice was steady, deliberate, the kind of voice that demanded attention. I blinked, confused, and shook my head. "You must be mistaken." He studied me as though I were a puzzle. "Number, you have his eyes, the way your jaw sets when you're holding back words. My boy disappeared 40 years ago, and I've been searching ever since. Then I see you sitting here. And for a moment, I thought maybe." He stopped, his lips pressing into a thin line. I leaned back against the booth, uneasy. "I'm sorry about your son, but I'm not him." The old man nodded slowly, but he didn't move. "Maybe not. But you carry the same look he did before he left. A man weighed down by something he doesn't know how to carry." His words stung because they felt true. I wanted to tell him to leave me alone, but a part of me couldn't. There was something in his eyes, something familiar, like he had carried pain for so long it had become part of him. "My name's Walter," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, warm, grounding. "Michael," I replied quietly. Walter nodded as though the name confirmed something. He leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "You've lost something. I can see it." I let out a hollow laugh. "Lost everything, actually. My job this morning, my wife tonight, and my kids." My throat tightened. She took them with her. Walter didn't flinch. He just looked at me with the patience of someone who had sat through storms far worse. I know that kind of pain. Different details, but the same hollow feeling inside. You start to believe maybe the world is right about you, that you don't matter, that no one would notice if you walked out the door and never came back. His words cut through me like a blade. He was speaking the thoughts I had been too afraid to admit. I clenched my fists against the table. I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I try, it's not enough. I worked 12 years at that factory and they let me go without a second thought. I built a home and my wife tells me I ruined it. My kids. My voice cracked. My voice. They looked at me tonight like they didn't understand what was happening. And I had no answers. Walter leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. You can't let that be the end of your story. I frowned. What choice do I have? He exhaled slowly as though weighing his response. You have the choice to stand to fight, to refuse to let their words define you. Do you think I stopped searching for my boy because 40 years passed? Do you think I accepted the world's silence as the final word? Number. Because if I did, then his story would end with disappearance and mine with regret. I kept going because hope was all I had left, and that hope kept me alive. The diner seemed to fade around us, the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation disappearing under the weight of his words. For the first time since Laura's sentence tore my life apart, I felt something flicker inside me. Something small but undeniable. I looked at Walter unsure why this stranger had chosen me, why he spoke with such conviction to a man he had just met. But deep down, I understood. He saw the same emptiness in me that had lived in him for decades, and he refused to let me sink into it. That was when he leaned closer, his voice firm but gentle, and prepared to say the 5 words that would change everything. Walter leaned forward, his hands resting on the worn surface of the booth table. His eyes stayed locked on mine, as though he could see straight through me. Then, with a firmness that cut through the noise in my head, he said, "Don't abandon them like me." Those 5 words hit harder than anything Laura had thrown at me. Harder than losing my job, harder than the silence that followed when my kids were taken out of the house. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. It was as if he had reached inside and pulled the thoughts I was trying to bury into the light. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quiet, almost afraid of the answer. Walter's gaze didn't waver. When my son disappeared, I looked back on the years before and saw a man who wasn't there when it mattered. I worked long hours. I told myself I was providing, but really I was hiding. I was angry, short-tempered, always finding fault. I thought discipline meant silence. I thought love could be implied. Then one night he was gone. 40 years have passed, and not a day goes by that I don't ask myself if he left because he believed I didn't care, because I abandoned him in every way that counts, even while living under the same roof. His words sank into me like stones in water. I saw flashes of Jacob's wide eyes asking if I was coming with them. I saw Emily's small hand gripping the strap of her backpack as she followed her mother out the door. I had told myself I was too broken to fight, too beaten down to stand. But in that moment I realized the truth. If I gave in now, I would be walking the same path Walter regretted every day of his life. I pressed my palms flat against the table. I don't want to be that kind of father. I don't want them to grow up thinking I gave up on them. Walter nodded slowly, relief flickering across his face. Then don't. You still have a chance. You can lose a job. You can lose a marriage, but you cannot lose yourself. Not unless you decide to hand yourself over. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. But what if she doesn't let me see them? What if she keeps pushing me out? His jaw tightened, and for the first time his voice carried a sharp edge. Then you fight not with anger, not with bitterness, but with everything inside you that loves those kids. You show them you are there. You show them they matter more than your pride, more than your pain. You do not disappear into the night, and you do not let them wonder if you cared. Because if you abandon them now, Michael, that question will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The conviction in his tone made my chest burn. I sat there staring at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, speaking to me as if he had been waiting his whole life to say these words. For the first time all day, I felt a fire spark inside me, something stronger than shame or despair. It was small, fragile, but it was real. I leaned back, my fists clenched, my breath steadying. I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to see my kids. I'm going to tell them the truth. I can't let their last memory of me be silence. Walter's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked almost proud. That's it. That's the man your children need. Not perfect, not unbroken, but present, strong enough to keep standing. I nodded, the weight of his words anchoring me. Thank you, I said, and my voice cracked. I don't know why you sat down here tonight, but I needed this more than I can explain. He gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. Maybe I didn't choose. Maybe it was meant to happen this way. The waitress came by, topping off our coffee, and I realized mine was still untouched. Walter lifted his cup, sipped, and set it down with a quiet clink. You know what you have to do now. Don't waste time. Don't let fear decide for you. Go to them. I stared at the coffee, then at my hands, scarred and rough from years at the factory. They weren't the hands of a successful man, not in Laura's eyes. But maybe they could still be the hands of a father who refused to let go. I stood my chair, scraping against the tiled floor. I'm going, I said, more to myself than to him. Walter reached across the table, placing a steady hand on my arm. His grip was strong, almost unnaturally so for a man his age. Remember what I told you? Don't abandon them like me. I nodded. The words seared into me. I turned and walked toward the door, my chest pounding with a new kind of energy. I pushed into the night air, the cool breeze carrying away the stale scent of grease and coffee. For the first time since the morning, my steps had purpose. As I crossed the empty parking lot, I glanced back at the diner. Through the window, I saw Walter sitting there, still watching me. He lifted his cup in a small gesture, a silent send-off. I raised my hand in return, then climbed into my car. I knew where Laura would be. She always ran to Karen's house when she needed backup. That was where she had taken Jacob and Emily. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I still had to fight for. I drove into the night, Walter's words echoing in my mind. I didn't know what waited at the other end. I didn't know if Laura would slam the door in my face or if the kids would even understand, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to abandon them. The drive to Karen's house felt longer than it should have, though I knew every turn by heart. My chest tightened with every mile, but Walter's words kept me from turning the car around. Don't abandon them like me. I repeated it over and over until it became my anchor. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights inside the house were on. Shadows moved across the curtains, and I imagined my children sitting on the couch, wondering why their father wasn't there. The thought burned me from the inside out. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. My hands trembled, but I forced them to stay steady as I knocked. The door opened, and there stood Laura. Her hair was pulled back, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. I swallowed hard but didn't look away. I came for Jacob and Emily. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't the time, Michael. They're already upset enough. You need to let this go." Something inside me shifted. For years I had backed down during arguments, too tired or too ashamed to push back. But not this time. "No," I said firmly. "I won't let it go. You can leave me if that's what you want, but you are not taking them away from me. They need their father, and I'm not going to disappear from their lives." Her eyes narrowed, but she hesitated. That moment of silence gave me courage. Do you remember when we first held Jacob in the hospital? I asked. My voice cracked, but I pushed on. You told me I made you feel safe, like nothing could shake us. I haven't been perfect, Laura, but I've always loved them, and I will not let them grow up thinking I didn't fight for them. From behind her, a small voice broke the tension. Dad. Jacob's face appeared around the corner, his eyes wide and searching. He stepped forward, and in that instant, the weight I had been carrying cracked open. Jacob, I said, my throat thick. He ran to me before Laura could stop him, wrapping his arms around my waist. His hug was desperate, like he had been holding in fear all night and finally let it out. Emily followed close behind, her little arms wrapping around my leg. Daddy, are you staying with us? She asked, her voice small and hopeful. I knelt, pulling them both close, my arms trembling as I held them. I'm here, I said, pressing my cheek against their hair. I'm not going anywhere. Laura stood in the doorway, her arms still crossed, but her eyes softened slightly. I could see the conflict on her face. She had expected me to stay broken, to disappear into the night like a man too weak to stand. Instead, she saw me standing taller than I had in years. You think this changes anything? She asked, her voice quieter now. It changes everything, I said. Because I finally understand who I am. I may not have the best job. I may not have been the husband you wanted, but I am their father, and I will fight to be in their lives. You can't take that away. Jacob pulled back, looking up at me with determination in his eyes. We need you, Dad. Hearing those words broke me open in a different way. The doubt, the shame, the voice in my head telling me I was worthless, all of it began to fade under the strength of my son's voice. Laura's sister appeared behind her, frowning. Maybe you should let him talk to the kids, she said softly. They deserve that much. Laura glanced back, then returned her gaze to me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. Fine, you can see them, but this doesn't mean I've changed my mind. I stood, keeping my hands on my children's shoulders. You don't have to change your mind tonight, but know this. I will not stop being their father. I won't back down again. We moved into the living room. Jacob sat pressed against me, Emily on my lap, their small bodies clinging to mine as if I might vanish. I told them the truth in simple words they could understand. That sometimes parents fight. That sometimes people lose jobs and make mistakes, but that none of it would ever change how much I loved them. I could see in her expression that she wasn't ready to forgive or reconcile, but I also saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. The night stretched on with quiet conversation, the children's voices filling the space I thought I had lost forever. When I finally stood to leave, Jacob clung to my arm. You'll come back tomorrow, right? I bent down and met his eyes. Tomorrow, and the next day, and every day I can. I'll never stop showing up for you. Emily hugged me tightly. Promise? I kissed the top of her head. I promise. As I stepped out into the cool night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The problems weren't gone. My marriage was still fractured. My job was still gone. And my future was uncertain. But for the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by those losses. I had something stronger pulling me forward. The love of my children and the choice to fight for them. I walked back to my car, replaying Jacob's words in my head. We need you, Dad. Those 4 words carried more power than all of Laura's bitterness, more weight than any pink slip from the factory. And behind those words was Walter's voice, steady and unshakable. Don't abandon them like me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was and exactly where I was going. The morning after I confronted Laura and saw my children, I woke with a different kind of weight in my chest. It was not the crushing burden of despair I had carried the day before. It was the heavy responsibility of a promise I had made to Jacob and Emily, a promise that I would never walk away from them no matter how broken I felt. The days that followed were not easy. Laura stayed distant, guarded, and often cold. In her words, she reminded me again and again that our marriage was not the same, that she was tired of carrying a man who never reached higher than the bare minimum. But even in her bitterness, she could not ignore the change in me. I did not argue with anger. I did not retreat into silence. I stood my ground with calm conviction, and every time I looked at my children, I remembered why. I picked up part-time work wherever I could, stocking shelves, delivering supplies, fixing small engines for neighbors. It was not glamorous, but it kept me moving, kept me proving to myself that I was still capable of building. Slowly, opportunities opened up. My father Frank gave me tools from his shop, telling me it was time to put my hands to use in a way that was mine. My brother Daniel stopped by and said, "I don't know what happened to you, but you finally look alive." Most importantly, my children never doubted me again. Jacob began asking me to help him with his school projects, pulling me in with excitement I had not seen in months. Emily drew pictures of the three of us holding hands, taping them proudly to the fridge whenever I visited. They were watching me closely, learning not from my words but from my choices. And every day I showed up, I proved to them that their father was still standing. Weeks later, I returned to Sam's diner. I wanted to thank Walter, to tell him how his 5 words had redirected my life. When I stepped inside, I scanned the booths, but he was nowhere to be found. The same waitress approached, and I asked if she had seen him. "Walter," she repeated, frowning. "You mean Walter Grayson?" I nodded eagerly. Yes, he sat with me here, gray hair, strong build for his age, kind of serious but with a sharp presence. She gave me a puzzled look. "I knew Walter. He used to come in years ago, but he passed away a long time back. I haven't seen him in over a decade." The cup of coffee in my hand trembled slightly. I glanced around the diner, half expecting him to suddenly appear, but the booths were empty, the clatter of plates and hum of conversation carrying on as though he had never been there. I walked back to the corner booth where he had sat with me that night. I slid into the seat and stared at the table, running my hand across the smooth surface. Whether Walter had been flesh and blood or something else entirely, his presence was real to me. His words were real. His warning had saved me from stepping into the same void that had consumed his life. I sat there quietly, whispering a thank you into the empty air, hoping somehow it would reach him. Then I left the diner, carrying his message forward, determined never to forget it. Looking back now, I understand the lesson he gave me. Life can strip you down to nothing. Jobs vanish. Marriages break. People you trust can wound you in ways you never thought possible. But none of that means you stop fighting for the people who truly matter. A father's worth is not measured by his paycheck or the state of his marriage. It is measured by his presence, by his refusal to walk away, by the steady love that anchors his children, even when the world shakes. I am still rebuilding. I am still learning to stand tall even when the ground feels unsteady. But I know now that I am not worthless. I am a father, and that is enough reason to keep moving forward. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Do not abandon the people who need you. Do not let despair convince you that walking away is easier than standing tall. Show up even when it feels impossible, especially then, because sometimes the smallest act of staying present can change a life forever. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own life or the people you care about, I ask you to share this video with someone who might need it. Leave a comment below and tell me what you took away from this story. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together we can remind each other that no matter how broken life feels, there is always a reason to keep standing.